Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a deeply intense, honestly incredibly raw story. We're going to look at how extreme childhood trauma, the kind of stuff that just breaks people completely, can actually be weaponized, turned into the ultimate fuel for personal transformation. We're pulling directly from the harrowing early life of David Goggins, and we're focusing specifically on what he calls the first challenge for growth. Let's get into it. To really understand this transformation, we've got to set the scene. Picture this: 1981, Williamsville, New York. On the surface, this was your classic wealthy, leafy neighborhood. We're talking doctors, executives, professional football players. It was literally the absolute pinnacle of the American dream. And seemingly sitting right at the top of that food chain was the Goggins family. They lived on a corner lot on a street literally named Paradise Road. I mean, you can't make that up. They had the 4-bedroom house, the pristine lawn, and a driveway parked with a Rolls Royce, a Mercedes, and a brand new Corvette, the whole shebang. But as you'll see, the contrast here is just jarring. On one hand, you have this glossy facade. Every single morning at 7 a.m., David's father, Trunnis, is standing out in that pristine driveway in a tailored suit, flashing this warm, perfect smile for the neighbors. But then you look at the reality. Behind closed doors, it was a totally different story. The terrifying truth was that the Goggins family was living with a tyrannical abuser. The second the neighbors looked away, that smile vanished. They absolutely weren't living a life of leisure. Instead, they were barely surviving this brutal, exhausting existence under Trunnis's absolute control. Which brings us to Section 1, Night Shift at Skateland. Basically a roller disco sweatshop. Let's break down exactly what that exhausting existence looked like, because this was David's reality at just 6 years old. While other kids are, doing homework or playing outside, David and his brother were forced into unpaid child labor at their father's roller rink in East Buffalo. They had to be there at 5 p.m. every single day. Imagine this. David has to stand on a step stool just to see over the counter. He's inhaling these noxious aerosol deodorizers, so much so that his eyes were permanently bloodshot, and polishing this massive rink floor. And when the doors finally closed at 10 p.m., well, the real nightmare began. He and his mom had to clean bacteria-loaded gum off floors and actually fish bloody tampons out of the toilets. Eventually, he tried to get some sleep on a lumpy office sofa, literally vibrating from the disco bass bumping above him. Oh, and with a loaded pistol sitting right under his cushion. Trunitz controlled every single cent. He never paid them, keeping his family totally trapped in this suffocating atmosphere of fear. But here's the thing. Despite being so young, David felt this deep moral dissonance. He realized early on that when you are born into a cyclone of terror and pain, you know it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, even at 6 or 7 years old, watching his mother get brutally beaten with a belt or seeing her dragged down the stairs by her hair, a splinter in his mind told him this just wasn't right. It's wild, but the human moral compass is incredibly resilient. David knew deep down in his bones that this nightmare wasn't normal. And that realization led to a massive, pivotal moment of defiance. One afternoon, Trunnis forced the family to go to a horse track, completely ruined a rare positive day, lost thousands of dollars, and then just raged at them in the car on the way home. David is sitting in the back seat and he just decides he's done hiding. His hatred literally overcame his fear. When Trunnis yelled at him, David looked him dead in the eye and said, "We shouldn't have gone to the track anyway." Wow. It was a massive psychological shift, choosing hate over fear. Now the consequence for that, it was one of the most brutal, prolonged belt beatings he ever endured. He was left covered in welts from his neck to his knees. But he absolutely refused to cry. So let's move into Section 2, the Great Escape, and finally leaving Paradise Road. All of this relentless violence eventually brought David's mother to her absolute breaking point. She realized, plain and simple, if they stayed, someone was going to end up dead. So she formulated this calculated, desperate plan to flee. The catch? She had zero financial independence. None. So for weeks prior, she played a part. She pretended to worship Trunnis just enough to get him to co-sign a credit card for her. And once she had that plastic in hand, it was go time. At noon, the kids packed their entire lives into black garbage bags. But she was smart. She knew Trunnis would immediately chase them down the highway. So instead of driving straight out of town, they hid all afternoon in a trusted neighbor's garage just down a dirt road, just sitting there waiting while Trunnis scoured the interstates in his Corvette. When they finally made a break for it hours later, their Volvo actually broke down outside Erie, Pennsylvania. Hysterical, exhausted, they ended up sleeping on the floor of a hotel conference room. But by the next morning, they got the car fixed and finally, safely arrived at David's grandparents' house in rural Indiana. They were finally free.
Which brings us to Section 3, the cost of toxic stress, the invisible scars.
So the physical escape was a success, yes? But those invisible scars followed David straight into his new classrooms in Indiana. The absolutely crucial point to understand here is this concept of toxic stress. We're not just talking about feeling a little nervous before a math test. It is the prolonged activation of the body's stress response systems. It literally rewires a child's brain, locking them in a permanent fight or flight mode. And this explains exactly why David, even though he was safely away from his father, suddenly developed a severe stutter. It explains why his hair started falling out in clumps, leaving these white splotches on his skin. And it explains why his memory was just completely jammed up. It made it nearly impossible for him to retain basic academic info, like simple reading or math. And we can ground his personal struggles in some truly devastating statistics. For kids coming out of abusive households, there is a massive 53% increased risk of juvenile arrest. There's a 38% increased probability of committing a violent crime as an adult, not to mention the huge risks for depression, heart disease, and addiction. I mean, on paper, David was the absolute poster child for the term at-risk youth. But it's so vital we recognize that this trajectory, it wasn't some inherent flaw in his character. It was a direct, scientific result of the terrifying environment Trin has created. Now, how the outside world reacts to a kid dealing with toxic stress makes all the difference in the world. Take his teacher, Sister Catherine. She saw a kid struggling, sure, but she held high expectations. She figured out that his brain just needed intense repetition and a ton of patience. She pushed him with this incredible no excuses mentality until he started catching up. But then, contrast that with his third grade teacher, Miss D. She was all about quick productivity. When David couldn't keep up her pace, she yelled, she stigmatized him, and she basically just tried to ship him off to special education. Terrified of being labeled a problem and just desperate to survive the intense anxiety she was causing him, David developed a brand new coping mechanism. He started cheating on every single assignment just to fly under the radar. Because of her approach, he had essentially learned to believe he was just born to fail.
All right, moving into Section 4, Challenge 1, the bad hand.
Now, I want to talk directly to you for a second. We're going to shift from David's harrowing story and hold up a mirror to our own lives. Because here's the truth. Everyone gets challenged. So what was your bad hand? What kind of limitations did you contend with growing up? Were you bullied? Did you battle insecurity? Or maybe, and honestly, this is a really sneaky one, maybe your limiting factor is that you grew up entirely too comfortable. Maybe you were so supported that you never actually had to push yourself. Whatever your unique trauma or limitation happens to be, that is your bad hand. So how do we actually tackle this first challenge for growth? Well, step 1 is simple, but it is brutal. You have to acknowledge your bad hand and the very real excuses you've made for why you shouldn't succeed. Step 2, open a journal or just grab your phone's notes app and write them out in minute, painful detail. Do not gloss over this. You have to give your pain shape. And step 3, accept it privately, or if you're feeling bold, share it publicly with the world. You literally must lay all your dirty laundry out on the table, because listen, you cannot flip your pain into power until you actually see exactly what you're working with. And that leaves us with this final thought. You've just seen how a kid went from surviving a literal hell on Paradise Road to understanding the raw mechanics of his own trauma. So I have to ask you, are you going to keep hiding from your past? Or are you ready to finally flip those excuses into the fuel for your ultimate success? Take inventory of your bad hand today. Let's get to work.
In conclusion, thank you for joining me today. I look forward to our next discussion.